Welcome to another new episode of the Get Organised with Decluttr Me podcast with myself, Shalina. I hope you're well wherever you are in the world. Today, we're continuing the Japan Inspire theme from my recent trip and focusing on something I found incredibly beautiful and deeply calming, the concept of Wabi Sabi. No, that's not the green spicy stuff you eat with sushi, that's wasabi, which is something else entirely. Wabi Sabi is a traditional Japanese worldview that embraces the beauty of imperfection, impermanence, and simplicity. It's about finding grace in the slightly worn, the asymmetrical, and the natural signs of use and age. And I absolutely loved it. As someone who works in homes of all shapes and sizes, and with people who are often overwhelmed by clutter and the pressure to be perfect, this concept really resonated with me. So often I hear clients say, it's not Pinterest perfect, or my home doesn't look like those ones on Instagram. And that makes me so sad because somewhere along the way, we've convinced ourselves that being organized means being flawless. That's just not true. And in fact, Wabi Sabi teaches us the opposite, that there's a real beauty in a space that is lived in, loved, and authentic. When I was in Kyoto, which is just gorgeous, by the way, I saw this everywhere. The temples and homes had wooden panels that were faded from the sun, ceramics with little cracks and chips that added character, and tatami mats that had clearly been walked on for years. But none of it felt run down. It felt warm. It felt peaceful. It felt real. And that's the energy we need more of in our homes. Now, I'm not saying we should all go around smashing bowls or letting everything decay, but there is something lovely about allowing your space to be what it is, a reflection of you, your lifestyle, your memories. That chair with a slightly faded cushion might be where you sit and have your morning coffee every day. That shelf that's a bit wonky, it's still holding your books, isn't it? Function first, perfection second. I think there's something very freeing about that idea, especially in a world where we're constantly bombarded with images of perfection, filtered, curated, staged. The reality is, most people don't live like that. Life is messy. Homes get messy. But that doesn't mean that we're not organized. You can have a bit of clutter, a bit of wear and tear, and still have a beautifully functioning, calming space. During my trip, I also noticed this mindset in shops. In many of the design stores in Osaka and Hiroshima, items were arranged with care, but not in a showroom style, not like you'd see here in the UAE or in the UK. It wasn't about perfection, it was about coherence and warmth. The textures, the materials, even the way things were displayed, it all invited you to slow down and appreciate the simplicity of each item. I'll give you an example. I went to the stationery stores that have that paper, I can't remember what it's called, but it's beautifully handmade paper. And then there was the ink and the quills and all these other items in the shop, and it just flowed. So you went from the pens, you went to the paper, you went to the ink, and it was beautiful. And even though it was plain white paper, but it was just beautiful. And it was on wooden shelves. It was just warming and calm. And it wasn't perfect. I could see things. It was slightly cluttered with too many things, but it was so calming. I didn't feel anxious looking at this clutter. And I think that was the beauty in the way they live and the way they embrace their lives. And that's something that I want to encourage with my clients to do when they're organizing. Slow down. Touch the items. Think about their place in your life. It's not about chucking things into a skip because they don't fit your aesthetic. It's about deciding whether they still serve you and if they still bring you peace and functionality. Wabi Sabi also acknowledges that everything has a life cycle. And I think that's really important when decluttering. Some items have served their purpose and it's okay to let them go, not with guilt or frustration, but with gratitude. That worn-out handbag you carried for years, it supported you. That chipped mug from your university days, it saw you through countless cups of tea. Thank it even though, I'm not a fan of doing all that usually, but thank it, then let it move on. That little ritual can make you feel less like a loss when you're decluttering it and more like closure. Another big takeaway from Wabi Sabi is the idea of a symmetry. Not everything has to match. You don't need all your storage bins to be identical. You don't need to buy into those influencer style pantries with 47 of the same container. Use what you have, mix and match. It's your home, not a showroom. When things feel authentic and personal, they're more likely to last because they reflect your actual lifestyle. When I talk about realistic organizing, this is exactly what I mean. I've said this before and I'll keep on saying it, but I really don't believe in those all or nothing transformations. You don't need to take everything out of a room and start from scratch. That's overwhelming and often unnecessary, and also a waste of money. You can start small, keep what works, and add structure bit by bit. Wabi Sabi fits so well with that. It's not about throwing away everything that isn't pristine. It's about making space for all the things that still serve you, even if they're a bit worn or mismatched. There's also a wonderful stillness to the Wabi Sabi way of thinking. It encourages you to be present, to notice the texture of the wood in your table, the soft light coming through a wrinkled curtain, the way your things sit in your space. That mindfulness is so helpful when you're organizing because it's easy to rush, to just throw things into baskets and hope for the best. But when you slow down, you make better decisions. You're not just decluttering, you're curating. One of my favorite things I brought home from Japan was a small handmade ceramic bowl from a market in Kyoto. It's not even symmetrical. The glaze is slightly uneven, and that's exactly why I love it. It has character. It feels intentional, even though it's not perfect. And that's how I want people to feel about their homes. Not flawless, but full of life. I think we can all use a bit of grace when it comes to our spaces. Like a bit more of it. Not everything will be tidy all the time. Not every drawer will be perfectly labeled. But if you know where your essentials are, if you can breathe in your own space, and if it supports you instead of drains you, that's a win. So here's my little challenge to you this week. Pick one area of your home. Maybe it's your entryway, maybe it's your bathroom. And rather than aiming to perfect it, just give it some attention. Wipe it down. Reorganize a few things. Keep the items that are still useful even if they're not pristine. Let go of what is not serving you and let it be good enough, not perfect. You'll be surprised how peaceful that feels. If you're someone who's held back from getting started because it doesn't feel like you can get it to look like the photos online, I see you. And I promise, you don't need to live up to that. You just need a space that works for you. You can also bring in more natural textures and items that have meaning rather than things that are purely decorative. Maybe it's a handmade basket, an old photo in a slightly cracked frame, a worn wooden bowl from a market. These imperfect things often hold far more value than something new and shiny. And remember, your organizing journey is yours. It doesn't need to look like anyone else's. The Japanese embrace the idea that nothing lasts forever. Nothing is finished and nothing is perfect. And yet everything is still beautiful. That's the Wabi Sabi way. Let me know what you think. Have you tried embracing imperfection in your organizing? Do you have a favorite item at home that's a bit worn but still loved? I'd love to hear you. You can message me on Instagram at declutterme or visit my website declutterme.com for more tips and support. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope this episode has given you a fresh way to look at your space and your stuff. I'll be back next week with more Japanese-inspired help, information, guidance. Until then, take care and thanks for listening. Bye.